A 10-year-old girl vanished without a trace after her piano lesson, leaving a family shattered for nearly 2 decades, until a forgotten piece of sheet music discovered in an old storage unit finally unraveled the mystery and changed everything. Before we begin this incredible journey, please tell me where you're watching from and leave a comment down below. Now, let's dive into the story. The rain had started sometime after lunch, soft at first, a murmur on the windows of the Whitmore house, and then steady, like fingers tapping on memory. Diane Whitmore stood by the window, arms crossed, eyes on the clock. It was 4:12 p.m., and Emily was late. Not terribly late, just 7 minutes, but that was unlike her daughter. Emily was a punctual child, maybe even unusually so for her age. 10 years old, with her hair always tied in a neat ribbon, she took pride in arriving at her piano lessons 5 minutes early and leaving promptly at 4. Diane watched the rain streak the glass and told herself not to worry. Not yet. The Whitmores lived in a small Massachusetts town where people still left their front doors unlocked and knew the name of their mailman. On any given Tuesday, Diane could expect a smile and wave from the neighbors, the sound of lawnmowers in summer, or the slow crunch of rakes on fallen leaves in autumn. In autumn it was now, late October, to be exact, when the air smelled of damp earth and distant wood smoke, and school children traced ghosts on foggy bus windows. Emily had gone to her piano lesson with Mrs. Caldwell. Like she always did, her sheet music tucked carefully into her purple satchel and her coat buttoned all the way to her chin. She had said goodbye with a kiss on the cheek, her voice clear as crystal. "See you after, Mom. I want to practice the waltz again tonight." When Diane called Mrs. Caldwell's house at 4:20, the elderly teacher picked up after just one ring. Her voice was puzzled. "Oh, she left at 4 as usual. Had a lovely lesson today. Played beautifully." Diane's heart slowed, confused more than alarmed, but her mouth had gone dry. "You're sure?" she asked. She didn't decide to stay and practice a little longer, but Mrs. Caldwell was certain. Emily had thanked her, zipped up her bag, and pedaled off on her bicycle with a little wave, like always. By 5 o'clock, the clouds had thickened into a heavy quilt, dimming the afternoon light. Diane put on her raincoat, grabbed an umbrella, and walked the usual route between Mrs. Caldwell's home and theirs, her boots splashing in puddles. She called out Emily's name more than once, despite the gnawing sense that something was wrong. It was just a feeling at first, one that bloomed darker with every empty sidewalk and silent yard. It wasn't until she reached the row of bike racks by the side of the church near Mrs. Caldwell's house that the world seemed to tilt. Emily's bike was still there, locked neatly to the post, untouched. Her satchel was gone. That, more than anything, made Diane's breath catch in her throat. By nightfall, the police were at her door. Officer Rendell, a kind man with thick glasses and an expression that tried and failed to be reassuring, took Diane's trembling hands in his and said they were doing everything they could. That phrase, "everything we can," would become a kind of mantra in the days that followed. Search parties were formed. Helicopters circled the wooded areas outside of town. Bloodhounds traced the roads and found nothing. No shoe prints, no torn coat, no discarded satchel. Just an empty sidewalk between a piano teacher's house and a bike chained to a post, as though time had hiccuped and erased a child from existence. The story caught regional headlines within 2 days. Small-town girl vanishes without a trace. Reporters came. Cameras clicked. Tearful interviews aired on evening broadcasts. Diane appeared on the local news, holding Emily's favorite stuffed rabbit and pleading into the lens for her daughter's return. People lit candles in front of the church. Flyers went up on telephone poles, in grocery stores, and library windows. "Have you seen Emily Whitmore?" they asked beside a smiling school photo with a missing front tooth and ribbon hair. The days blurred, then the weeks. Emily's room remained untouched. Diane couldn't bear to change a single thing. The pink comforter stayed folded, just so. The music stand still held the same sheet, Chopin's Minute Waltz, which Emily had tried to master for her spring recital. Diane sometimes sat on the edge of the bed, inhaling the lingering scent of strawberry shampoo and warm paper. She listened to the silence and the ticking of the old grandfather clock in the hall, and each hour that passed without her daughter felt like another stitch pulled loose from the fabric of her life. By Christmas, hope had become a fragile, flickering thing. A few whispered theories circled town. Someone saw a strange car near the school. Someone else claimed Emily once spoke to a man in the park, but none of it led anywhere. The case grew cold, not because anyone stopped caring, but because there was nothing left to find. No fingerprints, no ransom note, no sightings. She had vanished as easily and inexplicably as a candle flame in the wind. 18 years would pass, and in all that time, Emily's name remained etched on the town's collective soul, like the final note of a song that never resolved. Diane stayed. She couldn't leave. Every time she thought about selling the house, a small voice inside whispered, "What if she comes back? What if she walks up the porch steps one day and finds no one home?" And so she waited through storms and springs, birthdays and quiet holidays. Every October, on the Tuesday closest to the date of Emily's disappearance, she lit a candle in the window and played the minute waltz on Emily's piano. The keys were dusty now, but her fingers never forgot. And as she played, her heart cracked open with both grief and love, two things that had never left her. Then one gray afternoon, almost exactly 18 years later, the phone rang. Diane answered absent-mindedly, expecting a telemarketer or a neighbor. But the voice on the other end spoke with a cautious professionalism that instantly pulled her upright. "Mrs. Whitmore? My name is Caroline Meeks. I manage a storage facility up in Vermont. I'm calling because your name came up in relation to an abandoned unit we recently cleared out. I believe we found something that may belong to your daughter." For a long moment, Diane said nothing. She sat in her kitchen, the receiver pressed against her ear, her other hand resting on the old placemat where Emily had once spilled chocolate milk and apologized with wide, earnest eyes. The voice on the line repeated itself gently, as if aware that she was speaking across some invisible chasm. "Mrs. Whitmore? Are you still there?" "Yes," Diane breathed finally. "Yes, I'm here. What would you say you found?" Caroline Meeks spoke with deliberate care, the kind reserved for people who had seen too much. "We were clearing out a storage unit in Montpelier, Vermont. It had been abandoned for nearly a year. The renter stopped paying, never responded to notices. We opened it last week. There wasn't much, mostly old furniture, broken electronics. But there was a box, small, plastic, taped shut. Inside were a few papers, drawings, and some piano sheet music. The name Emily Whitmore was written on several of them, in a child's handwriting." Diane's heart clenched so tightly she had to press her hand to her chest. Her mouth had gone dry, and a sound escaped her lips that wasn't quite a word. Half gasp, half sob. She gripped the receiver harder. "Are you sure?" "Emily Whitmore." "I am," Caroline said softly. "I thought it might be a coincidence. But I looked up the name, and well, your daughter's case. It came up. I'm so sorry." The next few minutes passed in a haze. Caroline explained the address, offered to overnight the contents to Diane, but Diane refused. "No," she said, her voice firm despite the storm brewing behind her ribs. "I'll come in person." The decision didn't feel like one she had to make. It felt like her body made it before her brain could catch up. She hung up the phone and stared out the kitchen window, past the brittle October trees, the curled leaves on the lawn. 18 years. And then, out of nowhere, a thread tugged loose from the fog of time. Not a clue from police. Not a tip from someone remembering a shadow. But a dusty box forgotten in Vermont. Diane barely slept that night. She packed a small suitcase, locked the house behind her before dawn, and drove north as the morning light yawned across the horizon. It had been years since she'd taken a long drive alone, and with every mile, her thoughts twisted tighter, her mind drifting in and out of memories like hands trailing through water. She remembered Emily's first recital, how she had stood on tiptoe to bow, her cheeks flushed with pride. She remembered the stickers on her practice sheets, the way she'd hum melodies long after the piano was closed. By early afternoon, she pulled into a gravel lot behind a nondescript beige building with a green tin roof. It didn't look like the kind of place where answers waited. But she got out of the car anyway, her legs shaky, her fingers cold. Caroline Meeks met her at the door. She was a woman in her 40s with tired eyes and a sympathetic smile. dressed in a brown cardigan with a name badge clipped to the collar. "Mrs. Whitmore?" she asked, and when Diane nodded, she extended a hand gently. "Thank you for coming. It's in the back." They walked past rows of storage units until they reached one halfway down a corridor that smelled faintly of cardboard and mildew. The door was already open. Inside, a few remaining items were stacked along one wall: an old chair with a torn cushion, a lamp without shade, and on top of a weather dresser sat the box. Diane stepped toward it slowly, almost reverently. Her fingers trembled as she peeled away the tape and lifted the lid. The air inside smelled faintly of dust and age. She reached in and pulled out a stack of papers, crayon drawings, a coloring book, and then, at the very bottom, music sheets. Not photocopies, not clean and new, but the actual sheets Emily used. Her handwriting was unmistakable: rounded letters, loops too wide, and at the top corner, a doodle of a cat in a tutu that Emily used to scribble when she was bored. Diane sat down on the edge of the unit's threshold and held the sheets like they were glass, like they might dissolve. She flipped through them slowly, recognizing each piece: Fur Elise, the Swan, a simplified Rachmaninoff etude, and then one last paper folded in half. It was a page torn from a child's notebook, and on it was a letter. The ink was faded, the handwriting wobbly and unsure. "Dear Mommy," it read, "I miss you. I'm okay. I play piano a lot. They say I can't come home yet, but maybe someday. Please tell Bunny I love him. I think about you when I close my eyes. Love, Emily." The world tilted. For a moment, Diane couldn't breathe. She pressed the letter to her chest, tears spilling freely now, and let out a sound that hadn't existed until that moment. A mix of relief, anguish, and something like hope clawing its way to the surface. Caroline crouched beside her, her voice low. There was no name on the rental file. It was paid in cash for years. But maybe it's a trail. Diane looked at the letter again, then at the music sheets, and something stirred in her, a mother's instinct long dormant. 18 years she had waited in the dark, and now, perhaps, the light had begun to flicker again. Not a blaze, not yet, but a glimmer, a thread, a song that had not finished playing. The hotel room Diane checked into that evening was modest, the kind often used by truckers passing through or families stranded by snowstorms. But it had a desk, a reading lamp, and a decent cup of coffee from the vending machine in the hallway. She sat by the window with the letter in her lap, and the sheet music spread out on the bed like relics from a dream. Outside, the sky had turned the color of bruised lavender, and the trees shivered in the early November wind. Diane didn't notice any of it. She was somewhere else entirely, half in the past, half in a future she never dared to imagine. And in the space between, her mind spun with questions she had buried for nearly 2 decades. Early the next morning, she returned to the storage facility, determined to chase down the smallest clue. Caroline met her again, this time with a manila folder in her hands. "This is everything we have on Unit 317, she explained. "Not much. Whoever rented it first did so in April 2008. They paid 6 months in advance, cash. No phone number, no driver's license. Just the name Peter Gray. Could be real, could be fake. The payments continued every 6 months. Always cash. Always mailed in envelopes with no return address." Diane flipped through the documents. The handwriting on the rental forms wasn't familiar. But then again, 18 years was a long time. Long enough for faces to change, names to be discarded, and trails to grow cold. Still, the name gnawed at her. Peter Gray. It sounded like a name someone might choose to disappear behind. "Do you have the envelopes?" Diane asked, clinging to the hope that something, anything, had been overlooked. Caroline nodded slowly and walked into the back office. A moment later, she returned with a small box filled with yellowed envelopes. Diane sifted through them, her hands careful, her pulse quickening with each address stamped in faded ink. Most were postmarked from somewhere in upstate New York, Schenectady, Utica, even a small town called Alien. One in particular stood out. Postmarked June 2014 from a village called Highbridge. It had a faint smudge of what looked like charcoal along the edge, like someone had handled it with stained fingers. Highbridge, Diane murmured aloud. I know that name. It took her a few seconds to recall why. Her sister, Janice, had visited a crafts fair in Highbridge years ago. Tiny place. Population barely 2,000. Blink and you'd miss it. But the memory sparked something inside her. If someone had sent a payment from there, maybe they had ties. Maybe they stayed. Maybe Emily. No, she didn't dare finish that thought yet. It would be too cruel. I'm going there, Diane said. Her voice held the calm force of a woman who had made up her mind, come what may. Caroline didn't try to stop her. Instead, she wrote down the address of the post office and wished her luck with a look that was part encouragement, part apology. The road to Highbridge curved through dense hills and fog-laced pine woods. The farther Diane drove, the more the world seemed to fall away behind her. The house she had left in New Hampshire, the years of waiting, even the sharp pain that had become part of her breathing. Highbridge wasn't on any main road. It sat quietly along the bank of a narrow river, with one gas station, a diner that smelled of bacon grease, and a row of clapboard houses that leaned like tired soldiers. Diane pulled up outside the post office just after noon. Inside, a man in his 60s with silver hair and suspenders stood behind the counter. He looked up as the bell above the door chimed. Afternoon, ma'am. Ah, Diane said, folding her hands together to keep them from shaking. I know this is a long shot, but I'm looking for someone who might have mailed something from here years ago. Name might have been Peter Gray. It would have been around 2014. The man gave her a curious look. Peter Gray, you said? Diane nodded. He rubbed his chin, eyes narrowing in thought. That name sounds familiar. Not sure about the date. We don't keep mailing records that long. But we did have a fella who used to come by every so often. Paid in cash. Tall, kind of thin, always wore a brown cap. Quiet type. Came in maybe twice a year, mailed packages, never said much. Her heart skipped. Did he ever mention where he was staying? Nope. But he drove a blue Chevy Nova, old one. Rust around the fenders. I remember because my brother used to have the same car back in the 70s. Can't forget that kind of noise when it starts up. Sounded like a coffee can full of nails. He smiled faintly. Haven't seen him in years, though. Maybe 6, maybe more. It wasn't much, but it was something. A blue Chevy Nova. A man who paid in cash and disappeared. Someone who used the name Peter Gray. Diane left the post office with the wind slicing through her coat and a sensation she hadn't felt in years. A whisper of forward motion. She didn't know yet what she'd find, but she knew now she was no longer waiting. She was searching. The diner across from the post office looked like something out of an old postcard. Frosted windows etched with the word ETS. A peeling Coca-Cola sign swinging above the door, and a single gas heater glowing faintly near the back booth. Diane stepped inside and was immediately greeted by the scent of fried onions, hot coffee, and something sugary browning on the griddle. A waitress in her late 50s, with tired eyes and a name tag that read Marlene, glanced up from the coffee pot. Sit anywhere you like, hon, she said, her voice edged with kindness, the kind that comes from recognizing another soul running on memories and caffeine. Diane slid into a booth near the window and ordered a cup of black coffee, though her stomach warned her it wouldn't sit right. She unfolded her notebook, the one she'd started years ago, where she had written down every lead, every theory, every false hope. Across the top of a fresh page, she wrote Peter Gray, Highbridge. Then she waited, sipping slowly, watching Marlene move from table to table like she'd done it 1,000 times before. When a morning crowd cleared and the place settled into its afternoon lull, Diane gently waved Marlene over. Can I ask you something kind of strange? She began. I'm looking for someone who might have passed through town a few years back. Went by the name Peter Gray. Drove a blue Chevy Nova. Tall, thin, wore a brown cap. Marlene paused, one hand resting on the back of the booth. Peter Gray, she echoed softly, like tasting the name. Doesn't ring a bell off the bat. But I remember a fella who fits the description. Used to sit right where you are, come in for coffee every few months, maybe once or twice a year. Never ate much. Kept to himself. Always carried a brown envelope, like mailing something important. Diane leaned in, heart beating faster. Did he say where he was from? or where he stayed when he came through. Marlene shook her head. No, ma'am. But he'd always sit there and stare out the window, like he was waiting for someone. Once I asked if he wanted a radio on, and he just smiled and said, "No, I prefer the quiet." Reminds me of her. Never said who her was. Gave me the chills, to be honest. That quiet detail tugged at Diane's ribs. Did he ever mention music? Now that you mention it. Yes, Marlene replied slowly. One time, the jukebox started playing an old Chopin waltz. Don't ask me which. And he just froze. I mean, stopped mid-sip. Looked like he'd seen a ghost. I asked if he was all right, and he said she used to play that, like she was born with it in her fingers. Gave me goosebumps. Never forgot that look in his eyes. Diane's throat tightened. That had to be Emily. Her daughter had fallen in love with Chopin at 8 years old. Played his pieces until her fingers ached. Diane reached into her coat and pulled out a folded photocopy of the sheet music found in the storage unit. Did you ever see this with him? She asked, voice nearly a whisper. Marlene studied it closely. I can't say for sure, but one time he left a napkin on the table. Had little music notes scribbled on it. Looked just like this. I threw it out, of course. Never thought it meant anything. Diane felt the ache of lost time settle in her bones. Do you know if he stayed in town overnight? There's an old boarding house up near the edge of town, Marlene said, nodding toward the hills. Run by a widow named Louise Pelham. Real private lady. Doesn't take many guests, but she's been around forever. If that fella stayed anywhere, it was probably with her. Diane jotted the name down like it was gold. Thank you. Really, you have no idea what this means. Marlene reached out and squeezed Diane's hand gently. If you're looking for someone you love, don't stop. Life's too short for unfinished stories. It was late afternoon by the time Diane reached the Pelham house. Perched on a rise at the far end of a gravel road, the place looked like it had been part of the landscape for 100 years. Whitewash clapboard, ivy curling along the porch rails, and an old porch swing swaying in the wind, though no one sat in it. Diane knocked once, twice, and after a moment, the door creaked open. Louise Pelham appeared, her face lined and stern, but not unkind. She wore a wool cardigan buttoned to her neck and slippers that whispered on the hardwood floor. "Can I help you?" she asked, peering over her glasses. Diane introduced herself and explained she was tracing a man named Peter Gray, who may have stayed with her some years back. Louise narrowed her eyes, thinking hard. Yes, I remember him. Said he was a writer. Quiet. Never stayed long. Paid in cash. Carried a battered brown suitcase and a stack of sheet music. Played the piano in the parlor when he thought no one was listening. Diane's breath caught. You have a piano? Louise stepped aside and motioned her in. The old parlor smelled of cedar and thyme. Against the far wall stood a grand, upright piano, keys slightly yellowed, its surface draped in dust. Diane approached, her fingers trembling. One note echoed when she pressed it, low, solemn, fading into silence. But it was the silence of something remembered. Did he ever leave anything behind? She asked quietly. Louise walked into the hall and returned with a cardboard box. He forgot this the last time he stayed. Said he'd come back for it. Never did. Inside, Diane saw something that made her knees go weak. A photograph of Emily at age 10, seated at a piano bench, smiling shyly at the camera. Beneath it, a journal. The cover read only one word, for her. Diane stood still for a long moment, her fingers trembling around the edges of the worn leather journal. The photograph of Emily, her Emily, was tucked just inside the front cover, its edges softened by time. Her daughter looked the same as in the picture Diane kept on her nightstand at home. Delicate, hopeful, the faintest flush on her cheeks as she posed beside the family's upright piano. The difference here, however, was the setting. Diane didn't recognize the room. It wasn't their home. The lighting was colder, more sterile. The backdrop was bare. And Emily's smile, on second glance, seemed restrained, like someone had told her to smile. She swallowed hard and slowly opened the journal, flipping past the blank first page. The writing inside was careful, almost reverent, in clean, steady cursive. The first entry read, October 18th. She played Chopin again today. She gets lost in it. like she disappears somewhere beyond the Keys. It's beautiful and heartbreaking. I wish she'd talk more, but I think the music says more than she ever could. She doesn't cry, but her eyes do. I think she remembers something. Diane sat down on the edge of the old parlor couch, her knees buckling beneath the weight of those words. She read the next entry, and the next, each one dated and brief, but together they painted a haunting picture. This man, Peter Gray, if that was his real name, had been with Emily. Not once, not briefly. For years. He described her with a mixture of awe and sorrow, detailing her daily routine, the songs she practiced, her quiet gestures, her rare smiles. But nowhere in the journal did he ever say her name. She was always the girl or her. Diane flipped through page after page, a knot forming in her chest. He had written about her, as if she were both muse and prisoner. A line near the middle of the journal stopped her cold. Sometimes she looks out the window like she remembers where she came from. I want to ask her, but I'm afraid she'll disappear if I say too much. I don't think she knows I found the photograph. There it was. He had known who she was, and still he kept her. She closed the journal carefully, the weight of its secrets pressing down on her like a mountain. Across the room, Louise Pelham stood silently, watching her with a somber understanding. He left that box with me the day he drove out for the last time, Louise said gently. Told me he had some business in Indiana. Said he'd be back within the week. That was 6 years ago. Never saw him again. Diane nodded slowly, heart pounding. Did he ever give a last name other than Gray? No, Louise replied, lowering herself into a nearby armchair. But he got mail. I never opened it, of course. But I saved some. Thought maybe he'd want it if he ever came back. From a drawer in a small side cabinet, she retrieved a bundle of envelopes, all addressed in looping script to Edward Grayson. Diane's fingers froze. That name, Edward, was her father's name. Emily had once named her doll after him. Could it be coincidence? She examined the postmarks. Most were from Ohio, a few from Indiana. One return address caught her eye. Summers Creek Rehabilitation Center, Fort Wayne, Indiana. Her breath caught. She looked up sharply. Louise, I need to ask a lot from you. But if you let me borrow this journal and these letters. Take them, Louise said softly. And good luck. I hope you find what you're looking for. Diane left the house just as the wind picked up, rustling the high grass that lined the gravel drive. Her hands shook as she drove back to town, carefully placing the journal and letters on the passenger seat. The name Edward Grayson pulsed in her head like a bell. She couldn't prove anything yet, but her gut told her he wasn't just a stranger. He had known Emily. He had watched her grow, perhaps even raised her, in some warped, broken way. Back at the motel, Diane laid everything out on the bed. Journal, letters, photograph. She reread the journal entries in full this time, making notes in her own battered notebook, connecting dates, patterns, references. Some entries mentioned a small church with red shutters. Others talked about a creek behind a cottage, about a dog named Rufus, and a garden where the girl liked to sit and hum scales. The next morning, Diane drove straight to the public library, a squat red brick building staffed by a young woman with a tight bun and librarian's lanyard. After explaining her research, Diane asked to look up property records and local church archives. 3 hours in, she found something. A property on the outskirts of Highbridge, listed under the name Edward Grayson, bought in 2008, sold in 2016. The address was Meadow Road, and next to the listing was a small, grainy photo, a white cabin with red shutters. Diane stared at it, her heart skipping. The pieces were clicking into place. She thanked the librarian and left immediately, the address clutched in her hand. That house, that land, it was real. Maybe it was empty now, but something told her it still held echoes. And Diane wasn't going to stop now. Emily had been there. She was sure of it. And wherever the truth led, Diane would follow, even if it took her through every back road and broken memory in the Midwest. Because Emily wasn't just a name in the news anymore. She was alive in these pages. And somewhere out there, her story still waited to be finished. The road to Meadow Road was narrow, cracked, and flanked by dense lines of pine and scrub oak, their branches brushing against the sides of Diane's car, as if the forest itself were trying to keep secrets hidden. The GPS flickered uncertainly as she crept along the gravel, her tires crunching slowly beneath the weight of anticipation. Every tree she passed, every mailbox that sat rusted and forgotten by the roadside, seemed like a silent sentinel guarding a chapter of Emily's life Diane had never known. Her grip on the steering wheel tightened as the car curved gently to the right and emerged into a small clearing. There it was. The house was a squat, one-story cabin with flaking white paint and the unmistakable red shutter she'd seen in the journal entries. The grass had grown wild and high, choking the porch steps and curling around the edges of the weathered fence out back. An old wind chime hung by the front door, its metal tubes clinking faintly in the wind like the far-off keys of a piano. Diane parked at the edge of the clearing and stepped out slowly, her footsteps muffled by the thick mat of pine needles carpeting the ground. She stood there for a long moment, just staring, breathing in air that felt strangely untouched by time. The place didn't look abandoned so much as paused, like whoever had lived there had simply stepped out and forgotten to return. With a deep breath, she made her way up the porch steps, each creaking under her weight, and tried the front door. It was locked. She walked around to the side and found a broken window near the kitchen. It was small, just enough for a child, or a determined mother, to slip through. She pulled her coat tight, cleared the shards of glass from the frame, and climbed inside. The smell hit her first: old wood, dust, and something faintly floral. Not decay, just the perfume of time. The kitchen was sparse, with a faded table pushed against the wall and a single chair still tucked beneath it. A teacup sat in the center, coated with dust, but otherwise undisturbed. Diane moved slowly, reverently, through the narrow hallway. She passed a tiny bathroom with peeling wallpaper, a linen closet with folded towels that hadn't been touched in years, and finally came to a bedroom. The door creaked as it opened. Inside, the room was bathed in soft light from a window overlooking a quiet creek that twisted behind the house. The walls were bare, but the room itself was unmistakably a child's, though not in the traditional sense. There were no stuffed animals or pink curtains. Instead, there was a music stand in the corner, a metronome on the nightstand, and piles of sheet music stacked neatly in an old crate. The bed was made, and the pillow still held the faint imprint of a small head. Diane crossed the room, her heart thudding. She knelt before the crate and pulled out one of the folders. Her hands trembled. The handwriting on the top sheet was the same sheet seen in the journal, carefully labeled, dated, and notated. But this one had something more, a note written at the top in bold pencil: Emily's Lullaby. Draft 3. Her breath caught. She flipped to the next sheet and the next. Dozens of pages, variations, corrections, full compositions. Not just music. These were attempts to say something, to remember something. It was Emily's voice in ink. She sat on the edge of the bed and began to weep, the weight of years pressing down upon her. In this room, in this quiet corner of the world, her daughter had lived, practiced, slept, perhaps even smiled. But why hadn't she escaped? Why hadn't she called? Had she been too afraid? Too broken? Or had she believed there was no one left looking? Diane took a slow breath and stood. She wasn't done yet. On the desk near the window sat a tape recorder, dusty but intact. Next to it, a box of labeled cassettes. Her fingers hovered over them before selecting one marked April 11th, The Girl Practicing. She pressed play. Static hummed. Then a soft, hesitant piano melody began, Chopin's Nocturne in E minor. And then, in the background, faint breathing. A man's voice low, almost reverent. Good again from the top. Let carry you. Diane's knees buckled, and she leaned heavily against the desk. That voice, so calm, so in control. She knew now. Emily hadn't just been missing. She had been kept. And this place, this house by the creek, had been both her prison and her concert hall. As the music continued, Diane's eyes settled on a small photograph taped to the wall above the desk. A newer one. Emily, older, 16, maybe 17, standing in the backyard, her hair longer, her expression unreadable. In her arms was a golden retriever, tail wagging, tongue out. The dog from the journal, Rufus. So it had been real. All of it. Diane pressed her fingers to the photo's edge and whispered, "I'm here, sweetheart. I'm still here." And now, she would find out where Emily had gone next. Because wherever her daughter had been taken from this place, whether by force, choice, or something else, Diane was going to follow. Diane sat cross-legged on the bedroom floor, the cassette player perched beside her like some fragile artifact from another life. The old plastic buttons creaked as she pressed rewind, listening to the tape spin backward with a soft whir. The voice, his voice, still echoed in her ears. Calm, measured. It didn't sound cruel, not overtly, but there was something in its controlled cadence that made her skin crawl, something that didn't belong in a child's world. She pressed play again. The piano began once more, slower this time, as if the child playing had become uncertain. There was a pause, a soft mistake in the rhythm. Then the man spoke. "No, not like that. Start again. Let rise like we practiced." There was no anger in his tone, but there was no warmth either. Just expectation, demand. The music resumed, tentative but obedient. Diane's breath caught in her throat. She knew now beyond any doubt. Emily had been under someone's control here. She hadn't run away. She hadn't disappeared. She'd been taken and turned into something resembling a protege, or worse, a possession. She sifted through the rest of the cassettes, their handwritten labels both tantalizing and terrifying. The girl laughs. Emily's sonata. Her tears. Each one felt like a window, a tiny peephole into years she'd never witnessed. But it wasn't until she picked up the final cassette, one without a label, that the air in the room seemed to change. It felt heavier, colder, like the walls themselves were listening. She slid the tape into the player and pressed play. Silence at first, then the soft rustle of clothes, a distant creak bubbling outside the window. Emily's voice, faint, as if speaking into the machine without knowing if it would work. "If someone finds this, please tell my mom I tried." A long pause followed, filled with shallow breaths. "I don't know where he goes when he leaves, but he locks the doors. I think he watches me through the trees. Sometimes I hear the piano even when I'm not playing. It's like it follows me, like I am the music." Her voice cracked just barely. "My name is Emily Rose Carter. I'm 10 years old, or maybe 11 now. I don't know anymore." Diane's hand flew to her mouth as sobs rose in her chest, thick and painful. The sound of her daughter's voice, aged only slightly, but cracked with isolation, was almost too much to bear. She listened as Emily continued. "He says I'm special, that I make the notes come alive, that the music listens to me. But I don't want to be special anymore. I just want to go home." The tape clicked off with a mechanical finality, and the room fell into stillness again. Diane closed her eyes, pressing the recorder to her chest. There were no words for the storm raging inside her now. Grief, rage, guilt, all braided together. This was her daughter, reaching out from the past, leaving breadcrumbs not just of who she'd become, but of who had taken her away. With trembling fingers, Diane rewound the tape and replayed it, jotting down everything Emily said, every detail. She clung to the phrase, "He watches me through the trees," and "I don't know where he goes." Maybe there was a pattern, a routine. Whoever this man was, he hadn't just kidnapped a child. He'd molded her, isolated her, made her dependent. And somewhere out there, perhaps in another house, another hidden place, he might still be doing the same. But then Diane noticed something else. In the background of the recording, under Emily's voice, the faintest chime of a bell could be heard. Not the wind chime on the porch. This one had a deeper resonance, like a school or church bell. She played it again and again, each time listening more carefully. The tone had a slight echo. She closed her eyes, picturing the area, the creek, the forest. Could it be a town bell? A train crossing? A factory? She stood and stepped to the window, staring out at the gurgling creek behind the house. There was a rusted mailbox nailed to a post by the fence, the address long faded. But tucked inside, weather-worn and nearly stuck to the wood, was a yellowed utility bill addressed to a Gerald K. No last name, just an initial. But it was dated 2009. That meant this place had been occupied well after Emily vanished. Diane's mind spun. She gathered the tapes and journal pages into her satchel, carefully photographing the photo of Emily and the dog, then slipping it into her coat pocket. She paused again at the tape recorder. Something inside her told her to leave it, to let it remain where Emily had once held it, spoken into it, hoped into it, a kind of monument to her strength. But then another voice, her mother's voice, her own voice, rose from within her. Take it. Carry her voice with you. She left it for someone to hear. As Diane stepped outside, the sun was beginning to set, casting long shadows through the woods. The wind stirred the branches, and somewhere far off, she thought she heard that same bell again, faint but real. It wasn't just a sound from the past. It was a clue, a direction. The man, Gerald Cade, wasn't a ghost. He'd been here. He had a name. And now she had one too. She climbed in her car, heart pounding, hands firm on the wheel. She wasn't driving blind anymore. Somewhere along that winding road ahead, Emily's trail was still warm, and Diane would follow it into the dark if she had to. Diane drove with the windows up and the cassette tapes nestled in the passenger seat beside her, guarded like sacred artifacts. The roads wound through low-lying hills and scattered woods, and every mile brought her closer to something that felt heavier than truth. It felt like justice straining to rise from the dust. She hadn't yet called the police, not because she didn't trust them, but because whatever this was, whatever had grown around Emily's disappearance, it was old and quiet and easily spooked. If she moved too quickly, it might vanish back into the trees again. So she drove alone toward the last traceable thread. The name on the old utility bill, Gerald K. The address had been local, registered to the same rural township, only about 25 minutes east from where she'd found the tapes. As she neared the location listed, her hands clenched the wheel tighter. The land grew flatter, emptier, fewer homes, more silence. Eventually, the GPS guided her to a dirt road lined with skeletal pine trees, their limbs twitching like the fingers of old men. At the end of the lane stood a faded clapboard house with peeling green paint and shutters that hung crooked like eyes too tired to stay open. A barn sat slumped beside it, half swallowed by weeds. No mailbox, no car, no visible signs of life. She parked under a gnarled oak tree, engine still running, heart still thudding. This was the kind of place where things were buried. Secrets, memories, girls. Diane got out slowly, boots crunching over dead leaves and broken glass. She approached the porch, one step creaking beneath her weight, and raised a hand to knock. But the door was already ajar. Just a sliver, but enough to speak volumes. "Hello," she called, her voice steady despite the fear working its way up her throat. "Is anyone here?" No reply. Only the distant caw of a crow and the faint rustle of something unseen. She pushed the door open and stepped inside. The air was stale, tinged with mold and something metallic, something old. The front room looked abandoned, but not for long. Dust had begun to settle. Yes, but there were signs someone had been there recently. A chipped coffee mug on the table. A stack of envelopes by the window, unopened. On the wall hung photographs, not framed portraits, but candid black and white images, each slightly off-center. A young girl walking a path in the woods. A hand reaching toward a piano. A profile of a face obscured by branches. Diane moved closer. The pictures weren't random. They were studied, composed. Stolen. A sickness rose in her stomach. She was in a space now. The man who'd taken her daughter and turned her life into a private symphony of control and surveillance. She searched room by room, her every step accompanied by the moan of old floorboards. Most of the house was barren, but in the back, beyond the narrow kitchen, she found a locked door. Its surface was scratched, the doorknob tarnished with age and something darker, dried blood, maybe, or rust. She knelt and examined the keyhole. It was old, rudimentary. With trembling fingers, she reached in her bag and pulled out a thin letter opener from her purse, an object she'd grabbed without thinking. She worked it into the lock and jiggled it, heart pounding, breath short. The door popped open with a reluctant groan. What she saw inside was not what she'd expected. It wasn't a dungeon. Not a prison. It was a studio, a recording studio. Crude, yes, lined with acoustic foam and thick blankets on the walls, but unmistakable. A reel-to-reel machine sat in one corner beside a dusty piano, its keys yellowed and chipped. Stacks of sheet music were spread across the floor, some handwritten, some photocopied, all bearing the same name in tiny script. E.R. Carter. Diane stepped forward, her hands shaking as she picked up the sheets. It was Emily's handwriting. The same looping notes and notations she'd made as a child, now matured, refined. There were pieces she didn't recognize: lament in G minor, sky beneath the river, plea for silence. Each one sounded like a cry, a whisper left in code. Her daughter had kept playing, not because she loved it, but because it was all she had. On the wall was a corkboard pinned with index cards, names, places, dates. A timeline. The first card read, Emily Carter, age 10, promising. Diane's knees buckled, and she clutched the table to keep from falling. The names continued. Other girls, some with stars beside them, some crossed out. Katie R. Madeline V. Sophia L. Her breath caught. It wasn't just Emily. This man, Gerald K., had done this more than once. He'd selected them, cultivated them, made them disappear behind the sound of their own music. It was more than obsession. It was methodical, a pattern. Diane took photographs of everything. Every card, every page of music, every inch of the studio. She knew now that Gerald wasn't a ghost. He had moved through towns, through time, leaving a trail hidden beneath beautiful music. He was a collector, not of things but of talent, of children. She turned toward the doorway, her spine stiff with dread. Somewhere out there, this man still lived, still walked free, maybe even still played. But Diane had the music now. She had the names. And at long last, she had the first real glimpse of the monster behind her daughter's silence. The sun had dipped low behind the hills by the time Diane stepped back out onto the porch of the old house. She blinked into the twilight, trying to ground herself, trying to steady the weight of what she had just seen. Emily's handwriting, her music, a twisted map of girls who had likely vanished just like her, names and ages pinned to a wall like trophies. It wasn't only horror Diane felt. It was fury, a wildfire of it. It coursed through her limbs as she locked the car doors and pulled away from that house. Her first instinct had been to drive straight to the police department with the photos she'd taken and the tapes she'd recovered. But as the dirt road stretched behind her and the sky turned a moody indigo, she couldn't shake the feeling that there was more, something deeper buried in this. Gerald K. had been careful, organized, a predator who moved quietly through communities like wind through reeds. If he'd gotten away with it this long, it wasn't because no one had seen him. It was because no one had known what they were seeing. When Diane got home, she didn't sleep. She couldn't. She poured herself a mug of lukewarm coffee and sat at her dining table, spreading out her phone, the photographs, the tapes, and a small stack of sheet music she'd taken from the studio. One by one, she reviewed each name written on the corkboard in the back room. Some she cross-checked online. News stories of missing girls, dates that aligned eerily well. Others had no trace at all, like they'd been erased before they were ever missed. The pattern was chilling. Girls between the ages of 9 and 13, all musically inclined, all vanished during ordinary routines, after school, during lessons, on the way home from a recital. It was methodical, and that made it more terrifying. Gerald hadn't just been obsessed with Emily. He'd been hunting brilliance. Then she noticed something strange in the notation of one of Emily's handwritten pieces, Sky Beneath the River. The way the notes were spaced, too wide in some places, strangely clustered in others, seemed deliberate, not musical. She stared harder, recalling how Emily used to invent secret codes with her when she was younger. They'd pass notes under her pillow. 1 dot meant good, 2 dots meant bad, 3 meant I'm scared. Emily had always loved puzzles, and suddenly Diane saw it. Not just notes, but letters, hidden in the rests, in the placement of chords. A message. Her fingers trembling, she reached for a pencil and began decoding the sequence, line by line, note by note. It took nearly an hour, but when she was finished, Diane stared down at the translated message scrawled in her handwriting. I'm still here. Look under the black key. Her breath hitched. The black key? She thought back to the studio, the old piano sitting in the corner like a ghost with teeth. Could Emily have meant that piano? Could she have hidden something there? But no. Maybe it was a clue from the past. A literal black key? A USB stick? A piano key hiding something? Diane's thoughts spun with possibilities. She turned the message over and over in her mind like a stone in her palm. Her daughter had left her a trail. And this was the kind of clue only a mother would recognize. It wasn't for the police or strangers. It was for her. She returned to the photos she'd taken of the studio, zooming in on the piano in each one. The keys were worn, many chipped, but one in particular stood out. The E-flat near the center had a faint smudge that seemed different than the rest, darker, shinier. She stared, then grabbed her keys, the sheet music, and the flashlight. 20 minutes later, Diane was back in that barn, heart hammering, breath fogging the air. She unlocked the studio door and went straight to the piano. She knelt in front of the keyboard and touched the E-flat. It gave slightly, more than a normal key should. Her pulse spiked. Carefully, she slid a nail under its edge, and with a gentle tug, the key lifted from a casing. Underneath, wrapped in plastic and tucked into a hollowed-out groove, was a tiny folded slip of paper. She unwrapped it slowly, reverently, as though it might dissolve in her hands. The handwriting was unmistakable, shaky but familiar. Emily's. The note read, "He made us play, so no one would hear us cry." Diane's knees buckled. She sat on the floor, holding the message to her chest, rocking slightly, the silence of the room pressing in like a held breath. Her daughter had been alive when she wrote this. Long enough to compose music, long enough to hide a message, long enough to be aware. She was no longer just a missing child. She was a witness, a survivor. And if Emily had found a way to leave this behind, then maybe, just maybe, she had found a way to leave something else too. Suddenly, the quiet of the studio wasn't peaceful anymore. It was oppressive. Watching, Diane stood, note still in her hand, and turned off the flashlight. She left without looking back, the doors swinging shut behind her. The message had been clear. The pain, the captivity, the music, it had all been a mask. But the truth was breaking through now. Gerald's mask was slipping, and Emily's voice, buried beneath melody and silence for so long, was finally beginning to rise. Diane returned home with the folded note pressed close to her heart, yet the heaviness in her chest only deepened. That night, she sat alone in her dimly lit living room, the silence around her broken only by the steady tick of the old clock on the wall. The weight of the past 18 years bore down on her, sharper and more unbearable than ever before. Emily's message was a chilling echo from the shadows of a nightmare Diane had tried for years to forget. The realization that her daughter had suffered in silence, forced to mask pain with music, ignited a storm inside her, a storm fueled by love, regret, and relentless determination. She couldn't allow Emily's voice to fade into oblivion any longer. It was time to confront the darkness that had haunted their family for so long. Early the next morning, Diane sat across from Detective Ramirez at the police station. The room was cold and sterile, a far cry from the warm comfort Diane desperately needed, but she welcomed the starkness. It grounded her. With trembling hands, she laid out the evidence. The photographs from the abandoned studio, the tapes, the secret message hidden in Emily's sheet music, and the note found beneath the black piano key. Detective Ramirez listened intently, his expression unreadable but his eyes sharp with resolve. "This changes everything," he said quietly. "We've been chasing shadows for years, but this could finally lead us to the truth." Diane felt a fragile hope blossom inside her. For the first time, it seemed the past might not be a prison, but a pathway. As the investigation gained momentum, Diane learned more about Gerald Kay, the man behind the horrors. He had been a pillar of the community, a charming, respected music teacher who used his position to prey on the innocent. Authorities uncovered records showing a trail of disappearances and unreported incidents dating back decades. But he had always slipped through the cracks, protected by silence and fear. The discovery of Emily's secret message was a key turning point. It galvanized law enforcement and the community alike, stirring memories and opening wounds long left to fester. Diane found herself thrust into the spotlight, her quiet grief now a beacon for others seeking justice and closure. Meanwhile, Diane's family grappled with the resurgence of pain and unanswered questions. Her husband, Mark, struggled to reconcile the man he thought he knew with the monster uncovered by the investigation. The siblings, once innocent and carefree, were now forced to confront the darkness that had shadowed their childhood. Yet amid the turmoil, a fragile unity emerged. They gathered around Diane, their shared love and grief forging a bond that neither time nor tragedy could sever. It was a reminder that even in the bleakest moments, hope and healing could take root. One evening, as Diane sat reviewing Emily's compositions once more, she noticed something new, a subtle pattern in the music she hadn't seen before. The melodies, the harmonies, the rhythms, they seemed to form a coded language, a story woven through sound. With the help of a musicologist brought in by the police, Diane began deciphering the hidden narrative. It told of fear and resilience, captivity and courage, the faint but unyielding spark of hope. Emily's music was not just a cry for help. It was a testament to her spirit, a legacy of strength that defied the darkness that tried to consume her. Diane realized then that the journey ahead would not only be about finding answers or bringing a perpetrator to justice. It would be about reclaiming Emily's voice, honoring her memory, and transforming tragedy into a story of survival. With each note uncovered, each secret revealed, Diane felt her daughter's presence growing stronger, guiding her through the shadows toward the light. The past, though painful, was no longer a cage. It was a foundation on which Diane could build a future, one where Emily's song would never be silenced again. In the weeks that followed the breakthrough, Diane's world began to shift. The police work intensified, but what truly unsettled her was a quiet revelation that surfaced one rainy afternoon. Detective Ramirez called her with news that seemed almost surreal. A new witness had come forward, someone who had seen Gerald Kay near the studio on the day Emily disappeared. The man, a reclusive neighbor named Mr. Harrison, had stayed silent all these years, burdened by guilt and fear. But something about Diane's courage and the reopening of the case stirred him to speak out. His testimony added a crucial piece to the puzzle. He recalled seeing Emily enter the studio, but she never came out. That day was marked by an eerie stillness, a silence that weighed heavily on his conscience. His voice trembled as he described the shadowy figure of Gerald, moving with practiced ease, his eyes cold and calculating. This new witness rekindled the investigation's fire, giving law enforcement the momentum they desperately needed. For Diane, Mr. Harrison's words were both a relief and a heartbreak. Relief that finally someone else had seen what she had suspected all along. Heartbreak because those 18 years of silence had cost her daughter her freedom, her childhood, perhaps even her life. Diane's nights were restless, filled with dreams that blended fragments of the past and flickers of what might have been. She saw Emily sitting at the piano, fingers trembling over the keys, eyes wide with fear and determination. She imagined the music floating through the air, a haunting melody that no one but Diane could hear, Emily's silent plea. Those dreams strengthened Diane's resolve. She was no longer just a grieving mother. She was a guardian of truth, carrying a torch through the darkest corridors of memory. Meanwhile, the police uncovered more evidence in the storage unit where Emily's sheet music was found. Among dusty boxes and forgotten belongings, they discovered a locked metal case filled with tapes and journals, Gerald's own collection of his twisted work. As Diane pored over the journals, the extent of his depravity became clear. He had cataloged his victims like trophies, detailing their routines, weaknesses, and, chillingly, their musical talents. But hidden within the cold, clinical notes were also signs of a fractured mind, a man tormented by his own demons, desperate to control and manipulate. Diane's heart ached as she read Emily's name repeatedly, each entry a reminder of her daughter's stolen innocence. Yet, amid the horror, there was a faint glimmer of hope. Gerald's meticulous record-keeping could finally lead investigators to the places he had kept hidden for so long. As the investigation broadened, Diane found unexpected allies in the community: parents, teachers, and musicians who had once trusted Gerald but now faced the painful truth. Together, they formed a support network, sharing memories, uncovering forgotten details, and raising awareness. Diane spoke publicly about her journey, her voice steady despite the tremors beneath. Her story resonated deeply with many, especially older listeners who understood the crushing weight of lost time and unspoken grief. They saw in Diane's fight a reflection of their own struggles, how to keep hope alive when faced with overwhelming darkness. The community's response was a testament to resilience, a reminder that even wounds inflicted in silence could be healed through unity and courage. One evening, Diane visited the old piano again. This time, it was not out of desperation, but with a sense of purpose. She sat before the keys, her fingers brushing lightly over the worn black and white, imagining Emily's hands once dancing here. The hidden note beneath the black key was still fresh in her mind, but now she sensed something more: Emily's spirit embedded in every note, every pause, every whispered rest. Diane realized that through music, Emily had spoken across time, reaching her mother's heart even when words failed. The melody was no longer just a code. It was a legacy, a bridge between past and present, pain and healing. Diane's tears fell quietly as she pressed a key, the note lingering in the air like a promise that love endures, even when silence seems endless. The weeks turned into months, but finally, a breakthrough came that would change everything. The police had been tirelessly piecing together evidence from Gerald's journals, the witness statements, and the peculiar clues embedded in Emily's music. Then came a phone call from a forensic analyst who had been meticulously examining an old audio tape found in the locked metal case at the storage unit. On it was a faint but unmistakable sound, a coded message Emily had recorded herself. Her voice was soft, fragile, yet unwavering, recounting brief moments of captivity, describing a hidden place deep in the woods where she had been held. The coordinates she spoke of were cryptic but precise. Diane's heart pounded as she listened over and over, each word a lifeline thrown across the years. The thought that Emily might still be alive, or at least that her final moments might be uncovered, ignited a desperate hope in Diane's soul. Detective Ramirez immediately organized a search party, including local police and volunteers, to scour the area described on the tape. The forest was dense, thick with the heavy scent of pine and the rustling of leaves, but the searchers moved with determination fueled by years of unanswered questions. Diane accompanied the team, despite the pain it caused to walk the path that might lead her to truths she was only beginning to imagine. Every step through the wilderness felt like walking back in time, toward shadows, toward hope, toward a reckoning long overdue. The community watched closely, their collective breath held as the search stretched on through rain and cold. Each day, a small battle against despair. On the third day, a discovery shattered the silence. A small, concealed cabin tucked away behind a thicket of evergreens. It looked abandoned, worn by years of neglect, but inside, they found evidence that confirmed Emily's story. Old musical scores, scraps of fabric matching the clothing Emily was last seen wearing, and a crudely carved bench near a broken piano. It was a somber, haunting scene, a glimpse into a past filled with pain and perseverance. Diane knelt there, overwhelmed by a flood of emotions: sorrow, relief, gratitude. She could almost hear Emily's fingers brushing over the keys, her quiet determination shining through the darkness. The cabin was a shrine to survival, a testament to the child who had never stopped fighting, even when no one else could hear her. Back in town, the news spread quickly. The discovery of the cabin breathed new life into the investigation and into Diane's family. Old wounds began to heal as questions found answers, and memories that had been buried started to resurface. Diane found strength in sharing her story, in connecting with others who had lost loved ones or fought silent battles of their own. She spoke openly about the importance of listening, to victims, to survivors, to the music hidden in forgotten places. Her courage inspired many, reminding them that even in the darkest hours, the human spirit could shine through. It was a lesson learned the hard way, but embraced with grace and determination. As the investigation progressed, law enforcement uncovered more incriminating evidence linking Gerald to the cabin and other sites where he had hidden his victims. His carefully constructed facade of normalcy crumbled under the weight of truth, and justice finally began to close in on him. Diane followed every development closely, her heart heavy but hopeful. The courtroom would soon be the stage where decades of silence and suffering were finally acknowledged, where voices long suppressed would be heard. For Diane, this was not just about punishment. It was about closure, about reclaiming her daughter's story, and about ensuring no other family would suffer as hers had. Late at night, Diane often returned to the music. She played Emily's compositions on the old piano, each note a fragile thread weaving together past and present. The melodies were no longer just music. They were a language of love, pain, and hope, an eternal bond between mother and daughter. And though the future remained uncertain, Diane knew one thing with unwavering certainty. Emily's voice, once lost in silence, would never be forgotten again. The day of the trial arrived like a storm after an endless drought, heavy with anticipation, trembling with the weight of decades-old pain. Diane sat quietly in the courtroom, the gallery filled with faces that had followed the case for years, neighbors, supporters, and those who simply hoped for justice. Gerald K., once a man cloaked in respectability, now appeared diminished, stripped of the masks he had worn so long. His eyes flickered with something unreadable, perhaps regret or fear, but Diane's gaze remained steady, unshaken by the man who had stolen her daughter's childhood. The courtroom buzzed as witnesses were called, Mr. Harrison recounting his fearful silence, the forensic experts detailing the findings from the storage unit, and, most powerfully, the voices recorded on those old tapes. Each testimony carved deeper into the facade, exposing truths too long buried. As the evidence mounted, the jury's expressions shifted from polite attention to solemn understanding. For Diane, every moment was both agony and relief. The trial was not just about punishment. It was a reckoning, a long-overdue acknowledgement of Emily's suffering and courage. The courtroom became a place where silence was broken, where stories too painful to tell were finally heard. Diane's heart swelled with a bittersweet mixture of sorrow and hope. She could almost feel Emily's presence beside her, as if her daughter's spirit was lending strength to the weary mother who had fought so hard to bring light into the darkest corners. The judge's final words, sentencing Gerald to life without parole, echoed in the room, a hard but necessary closure. Outside the courthouse, Diane was greeted by a crowd of supporters, their faces etched with empathy and admiration. She realized then how deeply the community had been touched by her journey, how many lives had been changed by a single mother's relentless pursuit of truth. The support was a balm, softening the sharp edges of loss and injustice. Diane felt a quiet pride not just for herself, but for Emily, whose courage had inspired so many. The music that had saved her daughter's story now saved others, reminding them that no one's voice is ever truly lost. In the months that followed, Diane worked tirelessly to raise awareness about missing children and the importance of never giving up hope. She spoke at events, shared her story with other parents, and helped establish a foundation dedicated to supporting families in crisis. Healing, Diane learned, was not a linear path. There were days when the weight of grief threatened to overwhelm her, moments when the silence seemed unbearable again. But then there were also days filled with light, when a melody played on the piano brought tears of joy instead of sorrow, when a stranger's kind words rekindled her strength, when memories of Emily's laughter floated gently through the air. These moments became threads of resilience, weaving a tapestry of healing that stretched across time and space. Diane found comfort in the small rituals she created, lighting a candle for Emily each evening, tending to the garden where her daughter once played, and most of all, letting the music fill the rooms where silence once reigned. Through these acts, Diane honored Emily's life and the unbreakable bond they shared. In the quiet of her home, Diane often reflected on the journey, a journey marked by unimaginable loss, but also by profound love and courage. The discovery of the sheet music, the witness who finally spoke, the cabin in the woods, the trial. Each step had been a chapter in a story that refused to end in despair. Instead, it became a testament to the power of perseverance and the enduring strength of a mother's love. Diane knew that while the past could never be changed, the future could still be shaped by hope, justice, and the melodies of a little girl who never stopped dreaming. And as the last notes of Emily's music echoed softly in the twilight, Diane smiled, knowing that her daughter's song would live on, forever a beacon in the dark. The months following the trial were both a time of reflection and renewal for Diane. Though the courtroom drama had ended with justice served, the real journey, one of healing and honoring Emily's memory, was just beginning. Diane dedicated herself to transforming grief into purpose. She established the Emily Grace Foundation, a nonprofit committed to supporting families of missing children and promoting awareness about child safety. The foundation quickly grew, inspiring communities across the country to come together and prevent similar tragedies. Diane spoke with quiet strength at conferences, her voice steady as she shared the lessons she'd learned: the necessity of vigilance, the power of hope, and the importance of never giving up on those we love. Her story resonated deeply, especially with older generations who remembered the fear and uncertainty of the past, but now saw a future shaped by compassion and action. In her own home, Diane created a sanctuary where Emily's spirit lived on. The piano, once silent for so many years, now filled the rooms with music that was both tribute and healing. Diane taught local children to play, sharing Emily's compositions and encouraging them to express their own stories through melody. The sheet music found in that dusty storage unit was carefully preserved, displayed alongside photographs and letters that painted a portrait of a girl whose life, though tragically cut short, was rich with dreams and talent. Visitors to Diane's home often remarked on the warmth that seemed to emanate from the music, a living connection to a child who had never been forgotten. It was a legacy built not on loss alone, but on resilience, creativity, and love. Diane's relationships with friends and family deepened as well. The pain of loss had once created barriers, but now it forged bonds. Reunions and quiet dinners became moments to share memories, laughter, and tears, a tapestry of healing woven through shared experiences. The community rallied around Diane, their support unwavering. Local musicians held benefit concerts, schools organized awareness campaigns, and neighbors volunteered for search efforts for other missing children. The ripple effect of Emily's story was profound, touching lives far beyond the small town where it had begun. Diane often marveled at the strength that had emerged from such profound sorrow, realizing that while Emily's physical presence was gone, her influence was alive and growing. On quiet evenings, Diane would sit at the piano, the soft glow of a single lamp illuminating the worn keys. Her fingers would trace the notes of Emily's compositions, each melody a thread connecting past to present, sorrow to hope. Sometimes she imagined her daughter sitting beside her, smiling softly as the music filled the room. Those moments were bittersweet, a mixture of longing and peace. Diane knew that no matter what the future held, Emily's light would always guide her, a beacon shining through the darkest nights. The story that began with loss had evolved into one of legacy, a testament to love's enduring power and the strength of the human spirit to find light even in the deepest shadows. As the years passed, Diane's story became one told not only in courtrooms and newspapers, but in hearts across the nation. Her unwavering determination reminded everyone that even in the face of unimaginable tragedy, hope could flourish. The discovery of that old sheet music in a forgotten storage unit was more than a clue. It was a symbol of survival, a melody of resilience that would echo for generations to come. And in that enduring music, Diane found not only her daughter's voice, but her own, strong, courageous, and forever intertwined with the song of a little girl who had never stopped dreaming. Thank you so much for staying with me through this deeply moving story. It's stories like these that remind us of the incredible strength of the human spirit and the lasting power of love and hope. If this video touched your heart, please consider subscribing to the channel, giving it a thumbs up, and sharing your thoughts or your own experiences in the comments below. Your stories and support mean the world to me, and together we can create a community where every voice is heard and every story matters. I can't wait to hear from you. Thank you again for watching and being part of this journey.